Hello and welcome to part 7 of our competition series. So far in this series we've been looking at how to run different types of RSA events and RSA competitions, and today we're going to look at how to prepare your students for taking them to an RSA event or competition that you are not running. This video is mostly aimed at taking novice kids or inexperienced students to a competition, because students who've been to 10-15 competitions should kind of know what to expect and should be fairly well prepared by virtue of having done it before. I'm also going to use the example throughout this video of attending an all-day Saturday university-run BP schools competition, because I think those are the most frequent, most common, high-quality debating competitions in the UK, where I'm based, but the principles should apply to really any competition, I would think. So I think the most important thing when preparing students for competitions is expectation management. With love in my heart, students who are going along to debating competition for the first time are never winning it, unless they are just genuinely exceptional or it is a really low standard of competition. And while those competitions do exist and those students do exist, it's just very, very rare. Debating is very, very hard, and the top debaters in the UK, and I'm sure in many other countries, are just exceptional kids who are not only bright and talented, but have put in insane amounts of work for years. So if you're taking some relative novice students to a competition, they're almost certainly not going to win, they're almost certainly not going to final, and they probably won't get close to the final. The kids need to know that going in. And that also means that since winning isn't the goal, there needs to be another criteria for success. There needs to be another goal so that these kids aren't just disappointed when they don't win, which inevitably most of them won't. I think that if you are an experienced coach or an experienced teacher, you've been to a lot of competitions, you might have a good idea of where the kids that you're taking are going to finish in this competition. If you are quite inexperienced or you're new to the types of competitions that you're now attending, I would just err on the side of caution. And particularly if it's a BP competition and your kids are quite inexperienced, I mean, they're really going to have a hard day, and they're probably going to take a lot of thirds and a lot of fourths. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that they shouldn't be there. I think probably if you take them along and they get all fourths, you probably need to give them more practice before taking them along. But when I take kids along to their first competition, I'm expecting them to have a bad day and to maybe only take 2 or 3 points out of 9, or 3 or 4 points out of 12 in a BP event, because that's one of the best ways to get better, is to go to these competitions. And you will be bad at the start, but that's part of the learning process. I don't think that's a problem. So I'm not saying don't take them, I'm just saying make sure the kids know what they're getting themselves in for. I had quite an unfortunate experience a few years ago with a coach who was working for an organisation that I did some work with, and I was chatting to her. She wasn't very experienced, but I'm not sure she was aware of how inexperienced she was. And she was talking about a school she'd been coaching that year, and how, she was like, oh, they've been really good, and we coached them all year, and they were such good kids, and they were really good at debating, but then I took them on to this competition, and they just got all fourths. And it was like, yeah, so they weren't good, were they? They weren't good, or they wouldn't have lost every debate. And you thought they were good because you don't know what you're doing. And you probably allowed those kids to believe that they were better than they actually were because you didn't know what you were doing. And those kids went in expecting to do really well, did really badly, and that difference between expectation and reality is probably going to lead them to being quite upset and possibly not doing debating again. Whereas if you go in knowing that 4 points out of 12 is a victory, 3 points out of 9 is a victory, and they get 3 or 4 points out of 9, then those kids feel good about themselves. So I think it's really important that they have reasonable expectations. Now, some competitions have a novice final, a final where you can only qualify for the final if you are in your first competition or your first year of debating. It's always worth checking if the competition you're attending has a novice final, and if so, what the criteria is for novices. And if there is a very novice criteria, like first debating competition, then your students might have a decent chance of making a novice final, and therefore that is a reasonable goal to aim for. But even letting the students know that, look, you're probably not going to get into the main final, but there's a novice final, so aim for that, is really, really important. It's good for kids to go in with their eyes open to these competitions. This is going to sound really obvious to some of you, but it's amazing how often this happens. Please make sure that your students know the format of the competition they're competing in long before the day of the competition. So if it's BP, they need to know what that means, that there are 4 teams of 2, that you get 50 minutes preparation time before each topic, that you don't get to choose what side of emotion you're on, that if you're opening opposition, you're speaking second and fourth, and an idea of how the competition is going to work in general, like what is the schedule, how many rounds are there, etc. There are so many times when schools have rocked up to competitions that I've been attending or running, and the teachers are like, could you just explain quickly to the students like how to debate at the start of a day, or could you just explain to the students like how the format works? Look, there are speakers briefings at the start of competitions, but you should never be reliant on them. Okay, you need to find out how the format works well in advance of the competition. Ask the convener, and then you need to make sure that you understand it. If you don't, ask again. And once you understand it, you need to relay that information to your students and make sure they understand it. It reduces stress and anxiety for the students so much if they just understand the sort of rules and regulations and structure of a competition. If they know, okay, that's a draw, I can see where I am, I'm 0-0, I know what that means, I know that we're against emotion, I know that we're speaking second and fourth, I know that I have 50 minutes from when I see the topic to when the debate starts, I know that I'm not allowed to go into the room until the debate starts because I'm 0-0. Alright, that's so good, because at that point these kids have a full 15 minutes to just focus on coming up with arguments. But if they're like, what is opening up? Are we the first or second team? Are we against? I want it to be for the motion. What room are we in? I don't understand this draw. How long do we speak for? Do we speak at the same time? Who was first? Then that kid isn't spending their prep time coming up with arguments. They're spending their prep time freaking out and asking questions that they should have known the answer to long in advance. I, wouldn't normally think I would need to tell teachers or educators this, but it's just happened one too many times when kids have rocked up to an event, and even when I've sent out really clear, detailed information to teachers, the teacher has clearly not read the information. They clearly haven't sent that information on to students, and it's a real shame for everyone involved. And I know that teachers are time poor, but if you don't have the time to read the information and relate it to your students, just don't come to this competition. Wait until you do have the time and then do that competition right, because it's not a good educational intervention to throw kids into a competition that they literally don't understand the rules to. They're not going to learn much. It would be like throwing me into a third year physics lecture at uni. I'm not going to learn anything because I'm not prepared for it. Cool. Practice. Unsurprisingly, the best form of preparation you can give kids is that they've practiced and that they've practiced in the format that they are doing. I.e., if it's a BP competition, they've done at least 6 BP debates at lunchtime or after school, and ideally, in a perfect world, you've had a little friendly where another local school has come to your school or you've gone to their school in a weekday evening, and you've done like a couple BP debates together, and they've had that experience of doing the format against kids they don't know, being given a call, a position, and some feedback, and then having to do it all again immediately after. So that will really be the best way you can lead them into a competition comfortably. Particularly for kids who are maybe a little bit fragile, maybe are not the most naturally talented, and so are probably going to struggle. I would not be throwing these kids into a competition without having given them 6 practice debates and ideally at least 1 weeknight friendly before I take them to a big full day Saturday, because it's going to be it's a big step from like having a casual debate in some chilled out format at lunchtime to then going and doing like BP full day event, 4 rounds against some really talented kids. You want to sort of scaffold into that if you can. Obviously make sure that the kids know their team name and who they're speaking with. It's surprising again how many kids and schools rock up to competitions and their kids are like, are we Hogwarts 1, 2 or 3? Or am I speaking with Ron or Harry? And it's like, well, why would you why do they not know this in advance? I do recognise, by the way, sometimes teachers tell the kids this and the kids just don't read or listen to the information, but try to inoculate against that if you can. As well, try to select appropriate competitions for your kids, right? There are juniors competitions, meaning competitions for years 7 to 10 or under 16s in the UK. So in particular, if you've got year 7s and 8 debaters, but even with year 9 and 10 debaters, try to not put them into a competition where they're going up against year 12 and 13s if you can. And some competitions are much more novice friendly, right? Like our one that we run a couple times a year, GDST juniors and GDST seniors, which is for sort of GDST schools predominantly, but we do invite other schools to it. It's a very soft standard of competition. Like there's a lot of novice schools involved. There's very few kids who take debating that seriously, and so that's a great competition for a novice school. Durham Schools is not, right? And there is a spectrum of difficulty, and it doesn't always go with how good the university is or anything. For example, the Oxford qualifier day is usually a very soft competition, but the Oxford finals days is very tough. So try to select competitions that are appropriate to the level of and age of your students, and if you're not sure, again, ask the convener. They'll be honest with you most of the time, and they'll have a good idea most of the time, or ask someone else in your network. If you don't have a network, no worries, you're starting out, ask me if you want, comment below, but try to build up that network and so you can ask people these sorts of questions. A few sort of sporadic ideas before we finish. Try to give the kids a clear focus for the day in terms of like something to work on in their speeches. The best one for me is just saying to them, look, don't worry about the minutiae, don't worry about any technical stuff, don't worry that much about what the other teams are doing. Just try to, every debate, come up with 2 or 3 good reasons or good claims or good points why this motion is either a good thing or a bad thing. Then try really hard to explain each of those points in turn as clearly as you can in terms of why your point is true or why it makes sense or why it's plausible or reasonable, and why it's important, why it matters, why it has an effect, why anyone should care. And if they can just focus on that and sort of ignore all the noise, that's a really, really good sort of foundation stone to build on. I quite often give my students links to YouTube videos of the debate format they'll be competing in, even though I would also give them at least 6 debates of practice before I took them to a competition, just so that they can see kind of like what the high standard is or what a higher standard is, so that they don't think that their lunchtime practice debates are what they'll be experiencing in the competition, and that it does get higher. I sometimes give them an A4 handout in advance of the competition and on the competition day with just some things to remember, like maybe a reiteration of some of the rules or the format or what to focus on. I did say not to be reliant on speakers' briefings, and I stand by that. But if a lot of competitions nowadays, they record the speaker's briefing as a video in advance and email it out so as to save time in the morning of. If so, please make sure that you've watched them, that the kids have watched them, and that you've got all the information from that briefing that you can. Obviously, please make sure they bring food, water, paper, pens, a tiring device. This should be basic stuff, but it's amazing how often kids don't bring food to a full day Saturday competition. I mean, kids need to eat and need to drink. Debating does burn calories, right? There's a great study about how chess burns, like top level chess players burn like 5,000 calories a day or whatever playing competitive chess, and that someone in a world championship final once, which is like 18 chess games in a trot, lost like 7 kilos over a week because they were like burning all these calories playing chess and not eating enough. Nothing that extreme is going to happen in a school's debating competition, but it does require energy. Kids should be eating and drinking. And I would always show them a draw, especially if they've not seen a draw before. The next slide is a draw. I'll just quickly show that in a minute. I might as well just show it now, actually. This is what a draw looks like for most PP competitions. Again, you can ask the convener to send you an example of what the draw will look like or what software we're using. Most draws look something like this. On the far left column you see the rooms. In this particular competition the rooms were named rather than numbered. On the far right column you see who's judging, And then in the middle 4 columns, you see the 4 team positions: opening government, opening op, closing government, and closing op. And you can see, therefore, you can find a team such as Westminster 4 and see that, oh look, Westminster 4 are opening op in Arthur Schuster room. And so if the kids have seen a draw before, it'll be easier to read and less intimidating when they see it. The arrows, by the way, beside the teams denote the result of that round, because that round happened ages ago, so the arrows won't be there on the draw, because obviously we won't know the result yet. But yeah, I would say that seeing a draw before a competition is quite useful, because that draw can look like absolute gobbledygook if you've never seen it before. And again, it's just one more thing kids might stress out about, and you just want them to have as good a time as possible and as low stress as possible. So, thanks for watching. I hope that was useful. And next time we will cover what to do at competitions. See you soon.